I stepped off the bus in Cedar Bluff, Montana, still wearing my desert boots, and the first thing I saw at my own ranch gate was my son mucking out a stall like he was hired help. 20 years. 20 years of deployments, 3 of them in Afghanistan, and I had pictured this homecoming 100 different ways. Never once did I picture Ethan, my 24-year-old boy, pitchfork in hand, flinching when a man half my age barked at him to hurry up. My name is Frank Callahan. I'm 58 years old. I spent 2 decades in the Army, the last 12 of those with the Criminal Investigation Division, chasing fraud, forged paperwork, and soldiers who thought they could hide money where nobody would look. I retired with a bad hip, a Purple Heart, and a habit of noticing things other people walk right past. That habit was about to save my family. The ranch I was standing on wasn't just land. My father, Walt Callahan, built it from nothing in 1969. 420 acres of grazing land and a herd of black Angus cattle that had won county ribbons for 3 generations. When my father passed, 6 years back, the ranch went to me and my younger brother Daniel, 52, in equal shares, exactly the way Dad's will spelled it out. I was overseas when the will was read. I trusted Daniel to run things while I finished my last tour. That trust is where this whole story starts to rot. I'd also buried my wife, Carol, 18 months earlier, ovarian cancer. I was in Kandahar when she died, and the Army got me home 4 days too late for the funeral. I tell you that not for sympathy, but because it matters to what happened next. A grieving, half-broken man 3,000 miles from home is exactly the kind of man people count on not looking too closely. Ethan set the pitchfork down when he saw me and just stood there, like he didn't know if he was allowed to run to me. When he finally did, I held on to him a long time, and I felt how thin he'd gotten. "Dad," he said, "why didn't you tell me you were coming today?" "I wanted to surprise you," I said. Then I looked past him at the barn, at the new tin roof, at a truck in the drive I didn't recognize. A white F-250 with a Callahan Cattle Co. decal on the door that hadn't existed when I left. "Where's your Uncle Daniel?" "Up at the house," Ethan said. "Dad, there's a lot you don't know." That night, over coffee at the kitchen table my father built with his own hands, Ethan told me the shape of it, though not the full depth, not yet. Daniel had told him 2 years back that the ranch's finances were restructured after Dad's death, and that Ethan's college fund, the one Carol and I had built up to $61,000 specifically for his agriculture degree at Montana State, had been borrowed to cover a bad year in cattle prices. Ethan dropped out of his 2nd semester to come work the ranch full-time, unpaid except for room and board, while Daniel drew a salary of $11,000 a month from something called Callahan Cattle Co. LLC, an entity I had never heard of and never signed a single document for. I didn't say much that first night. 12 years of CID work teaches you that the worst thing you can do with a fraud is confront it before you understand its full shape. You tip your hand, and the evidence disappears by morning. So I did what I was trained to do. I watched, and I waited, and I started writing things down. The next morning I found the first hard clue almost by accident. I went into the ranch office looking for Dad's old filing cabinet, the green one that used to sit under the window, and it was gone. In its place was a locked metal cabinet with a keypad. Daniel walked in while I was standing there. "Change the filing system," he said, "too fast, too easy. Everything's digital now anyway. Where's Dad's old paperwork? The deed, the will, the county filings. Lawyers got copies. Everything's fine, Frank. You don't need to worry about any of that. You just got home. Rest." Rest was the last thing on my mind. 2 days later, I drove into town and pulled the property records myself at the Grayson County Recorder's office. What I found made my hands go cold. In March of the year Dad died, a quitclaim deed had been filed, transferring my 50% interest in the ranch to Callahan Cattle Co. LLC, a company formed 9 days earlier. The deed carried my signature, notarized by a man named Curtis Boyle, notary license out of Billings. I had been in Helmand Province on that date. I had never met Curtis Boyle in my life, and I had certainly never signed away my father's ranch. I photographed every page. I pulled the LLC filing from the Secretary of State's website that same afternoon. Daniel Callahan was listed as 90% owner. The remaining 10% belonged to someone named Renee Voss, whom I would later learn was Daniel's girlfriend of the past 3 years, a woman I'd met exactly twice and never trusted. I called an old friend that night, Ray Delgado, a retired CID sergeant major I'd served 2 tours with, a man who'd put more forged signatures behind bars than anyone I knew. Ray answered on the second ring like he always did. "Frank Callahan," he said, "heard you were finally stateside." "How's the hip?" "Ray, I need a favor, and I need you to tell me if I'm crazy." I laid it out for him, the deed, the notary, the LLC, the college fund. Ray went quiet the way he used to before he laid out a case in a briefing room. "You're not crazy," he said. "You're describing textbook elder fraud, except you're not elderly, you're deployed, which criminals like even better because you can't show up and object. First thing, don't confront him. Not yet. You tip him off, records get shredded, hard drives get wiped, and Renee Voss disappears to another state with whatever's liquid. You act normal. You smile at Thanksgiving dinner if you have to. Meanwhile, you and I build a file the county attorney can't laugh out of the room. How long? However long it takes, weeks maybe. You've waited 20 years to come home, Frank. You can wait a little longer to make sure this sticks." So I waited. It was, without question, the hardest assignment of my career, and I include 3 combat deployments in that assessment. I moved back into the old bunkhouse on the property, told Daniel I just wanted to get my feet back under me before deciding what came next. I helped Ethan with the cattle. I let Daniel talk about the business, over dinner like he'd built it himself. Nodding along while he described a bank loan of $240,000 he'd taken out against the ranch through First Grayson Bank the previous spring, supposedly to buy new equipment. Though I never once saw a new piece of equipment show up. Ray worked his contacts. Within 3 weeks, he'd confirmed that Curtis Boyle, the notary, had lost his license 8 months after notarizing my deed, for notarizing 4 other signatures for people who were, at the time, verifiably out of state. Boyle wasn't talking to Ray directly, but a records request Ray filed through a contact at the Secretary of State's office turned up something better: Boyle's notary journal. A legal requirement in Montana, which every notary has to keep and which had somehow survived. My signature was logged with a thumbprint that wasn't mine, because Boyle, sloppy as he was corrupt, had insisted on it out of some misplaced sense of procedure. The bank records took longer. Ethan, without me even asking directly, mentioned one evening that Daniel kept a laptop in the office that he never let anyone else touch. I didn't ask Ethan to do anything about it, and I want to be clear about that, because I wasn't going to put my son in the middle of breaking a law to catch a man who'd already broken several. But 2 weeks later, Ethan came to me holding his phone, hands shaking. "He left his email open on the shared printer computer," Ethan said. "I wasn't looking for anything. I just needed to print a feed invoice." On the screen was a message thread between Daniel and Renee Voss, dated 4 months earlier. "Daniel, Frank's not coming back from that hip, trust me. Even if he does, Boyle's paperwork holds unless somebody pulls records specifically, and nobody's going to think to do that. By the time he's stateside for good, the loan's spent, and the equity's ours. Renee, what about the kid's college money? Daniel, the kid works for free now. Cheaper than a ranch hand, and he doesn't ask questions. Everybody wins except Frank, and Frank's never here to complain." I read it twice, then a third time, and I felt something in my chest that 20 years of war had never quite managed to put there. Not rage, exactly. Something colder and steadier than rage. I photographed the screen and sent the images to Ray within the hour. "That's your motive and your knowledge in his own words," Ray said. "Combined with the notary journal and the LLC filing, you don't have a family dispute anymore, Frank. You have a felony fraud case. Grand theft by deception, forgery, and depending how the county attorney wants to charge the loan, bank fraud on top of it. We set the trap on a Sunday, 6 weeks after I'd come home. I told Daniel I wanted to have the whole family over for dinner. A real homecoming, finally, at the main house, just the 3 of us and Renee. To talk about the future of the ranch. I could see the relief on Daniel's face when I said it. He thought I was finally ready to be managed, the way he'd apparently expected to manage me from 3,000 miles away for the past 6 years. Renee arrived first, in a new Lexus I later learned cost $58,000, paid for 4 months after the loan from First Grayson Bank cleared. Daniel poured wine like a man hosting his own retirement party. Ethan sat beside me, quiet, the way I'd taught him to be quiet when it mattered. "So," Daniel said halfway through the meal, "now that you're settled, Frank, I think it's time we talk practically. The ranch runs better as one clean operation. I'll buy out whatever piece of this you think you've still got, fair market value, and you and Ethan can get a fresh start somewhere warmer. Arizona, maybe. Your hip would thank you. Whatever piece I think I've still got," I repeated. "Come on, Frank, you signed off on the restructuring years ago." "It's not complicated. I never signed anything, Daniel." The table went quiet. Renee's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. "I have the deed," I said, keeping my voice level, the same voice I'd used across 100 interview tables in Kandahar and Bagram. "Filed in March, 6 years ago, notarized by a man named Curtis Boyle, a man I have never met, who lost his notary license 8 months later for doing exactly what he did to me on 4 other occasions. I have his notary journal, which logs a thumbprint that isn't mine, because he was careless enough to still follow procedure while breaking the law. I have the LLC filing showing you own 90% of Callahan Cattle Co., and Renee owns 10. I have the First Grayson Bank loan paperwork for $240,000, taken against a ranch you didn't legally own outright, to buy equipment that never arrived. And I have an email exchange between the two of you, dated 14 weeks ago, in which you say, and I'm quoting you directly, Daniel, that I wasn't coming back from my hip. And that Ethan works for free now, cheaper than a ranch hand because he doesn't ask questions. Daniel's face went through 3 colors in about 4 seconds. "You went through my email? That's an invasion of." Ethan needed to print a feed invoice on a shared computer that you left logged in. Nobody hacked anything. You handed this to us, Daniel. You've been handing it to us for 6 years, piece by piece, and I finally had the time to pick it all up. "Frank, you don't understand what it's been like," Daniel said. And his voice cracked into something almost pleading. "Dad left me nothing extra, nothing to build on, and you were always the golden one, off saving the country while I was stuck here shoveling manure. I was desperate. Renee and I had debts, real debts, and this ranch was just sitting here while you were gone. I never thought you'd come back and actually check." "That's the part you got wrong," I said. "I spent 12 years teaching soldiers to check." Ray Delgado had already walked the full file to the Grayson County Attorney's office that Friday, along with a formal complaint. 2 detectives showed up at the ranch the following Tuesday morning. Daniel was charged with forgery, theft by deception, and bank fraud tied to the First Grayson Bank loan. Renee Voss was charged as a co-conspirator, once records showed she'd known about and benefited from the forged deed from the beginning. Curtis Boyle, the notary, ultimately cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced charge. And his testimony about the 4 other victims he'd helped defraud opened up a wider fraud case across 2 counties. Daniel pleaded guilty 11 months later rather than go to trial. He received 4 years, with the possibility of parole after 2, and was ordered to pay restitution of $240,000 for the loan and $61,000 for Ethan's college fund, though restitution and actually collecting it, I've learned, are 2 very different things. Renee received 18 months and a smaller restitution order. The quitclaim deed was voided by the court, and full title to the ranch was restored to my father's original will, meaning Ethan and I now hold what was always meant to be ours. Ethan went back to Montana State that following spring. On a rebuilt account, I funded myself, studying agricultural business this time instead of animal science. Because he told me he wanted to understand exactly how money moves through a ranch, so nobody could ever hide it from him again. I think Dad would have liked that answer. I still see Daniel twice a year at the state facility outside Deer Lodge, because he's still my brother and Ethan is still his nephew, and blood, complicated as it is, doesn't just evaporate because a man did something unforgivable. He apologizes every visit. I believe some part of it is even true. It doesn't change the paperwork, and it doesn't change the years Ethan lost mucking stalls for free on land that was legally his own. People ask me sometimes if 20 years overseas made it harder to come home to something like this. I tell them it's the opposite. 20 years overseas taught me that the people who hurt you rarely look like strangers, and that the truth, if you're patient enough and careful enough, always leaves a paper trail. Trust is a gift you give once and can only take back with proof. And blood may run thicker than water, but it has never once run thicker than evidence.